We've told you about PFAS contamination in drinking water, but PFAS has also polluted lakes and rivers in our region. The source is often an airport or airbase, like the former Wirt Smith Air Force Base in Oscoda, Michigan.
Oscoda is a small town along the shores of Lake Huron in northeast Michigan. It is home to the Au Sable River, Van Etten Lake, and countless rivers and streams. For many years, it also was home to the Wirt Smith Air Force Base, a strategic air command base that was an essential part of the community until it was decommissioned in 1993. The base has since become Oscoda Wirt Smith Airport, but after the base closed, it was discovered that the Air Force left behind more in Oscoda than an airstrip. The ground was contaminated with chemicals known as PFAS.
So these chemicals, they don't break down. They dilute, but they don't break down, so I knew they're just going to be as far away as the groundwater could take them.
Bob Delaney worked for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy for 30 years. He was the first person to sound an alarm about possible contamination from dangerous PFAS chemicals on military bases. His first tests were at Wirt Smith.
What we found was every single well that we sampled, every surface water we sampled had this stuff in it. I had never seen a site like that, and eventually was about 8 square miles of groundwater and surface water that's impacted here.
PFAS, or per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are a group of potentially harmful chemicals that were used in a variety of consumer products. If it's non-stick, waterproof, or stain-proof, it was probably made with PFAS. At Wirt Smith and air bases around the world, crews trained with firefighting foam that contained PFAS. The contamination seeped into the groundwater. A high concentration of PFAS was found in Clark's Marsh, a wetland adjacent to the base near the fire training area. When fish from the marsh were sent to a lab for testing in 2012, the results were shocking.
The lab actually thought this was some kind of university experiment, that we'd sent fish from a fish tank that we had intentionally exposed to these things, but really it was coming just out of this marsh.
Initially it was a record. It may still be, for PFAS contamination in fish anywhere in the world.
Garrett Ellison is an environmental journalist with MLive and the Grand Rapids Press. He's been reporting on PFAS in Michigan since 2016.
It's really just sort of hard to fathom when you look around this beautiful marshland and you don't see any real sign of pollution, but the fish are that dangerous.
But it wasn't just the fish in Clark's Marsh. The Michigan Health Department posted signs warning not to eat the waterfowl and deer. And the warning about the fish extended beyond the marsh to the Au Sable River.
What happened when that news came that you couldn't eat the fish in the Au Sable River, that made it clear into Washington. I mean, the people at the top of DOD suddenly knew where Oscoda, Michigan was and what was going on here.
In 2015, the Department of Defense installed 7 extraction wells along the edge of the former base that connects it to Clark's Marsh. The wells pump water from the ground, filter it through granulated carbon, and then return it to the groundwater. The Air Force plans to add 5 additional wells along the marsh. This map shows the Clark's Marsh plume. The current wells are indicated in blue, and the proposed wells are yellow. Although the water put back into the ground has nearly non-detectable levels of PFAS, some local residents are concerned that even with the additional wells, only a small percentage of the contamination is being captured and treated.
There's a real question as to whether the wells being placed in Clark's Marsh actually substantially cover the plume that is present in Clark's Marsh.
Congressman Dan Kildee is the co-founder and co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional PFAS Task Force. In 2020, he worked to secure $13.5 million in federal funds to help clean up the contamination near Wirt Smith.
I want a more aggressive approach. I want an approach that says we're going to do as much as we can, not as little as we can get away with. I think it sets a really bad example when an agency of the federal government decides that it's going to put itself in the same category as a polluter who has to be forced by regulators to clean up their mess. That's just not an acceptable answer for me.
There is currently no federal standard for PFAS in surface water, but states have set their own rules. In 2020, Michigan adopted some of the strictest standards in the country, limiting 7 of the thousands of PFAS compounds to low levels. But the Air Force says it isn't bound by Michigan's rules under CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. They say they're only required to meet the EPA's much higher health advisory limit of 70 parts per trillion. And they say testing shows undetectable levels of PFAS anyway.
With PFAS and PFOA, the Lifetime Health Advisory allows us to consider under Section 104 of CERCLA this to be an other pollutant and take some action. The action level is 70 because of the EPA Health Advisory. The result is non-detect because that's what the technology gives us.
PFAS is detectable in Van Etten Lake, which borders the base. In the summer of 2017, white foam started showing up along the beaches. Tests confirmed it contained high levels of PFAS.
It's not as concentrated of a problem as out here in Clarks Marsh, but there's a lot more human interaction with the environment there, so that makes that a big problem too. And obviously the foam is kind of a scary thing to people, but because you can see it more, but it's firefighting foam basically. It's a dilute firefighting foam.
For reasons I can't explain, the foam that's showing up on our surface waters is getting worse. So there are times when you can see the foam piling up and blowing into yards. It's exposing children and animals and ourselves to this, foam that we could possibly touch, and it has high levels of PFAS in it.
Kathy Woosterbarth has lived in Oscoda all her life. She's co-leader of a community action group called NOW, Need Our Water.
On this beach here, I was a lifeguard for 3 years, so I spent a lot of time in this water, and I believe that I may have been affected. I developed cancer a few years after I worked in this location, along with an immunological disease. So it's possible that PFAS had a contributing factor to that.
Greg Cole moved to Oscoda from the Detroit area in 2008. He and his wife bought 3 cottages that they rent out on Van Etten Lake.
I'm apprehensive of swimming, letting my grandkids in the water, very sensitive to that. It's just, it's sad. I'm around this lake all the time. And, I tell my renters about the contamination when they come. We're straightforward with them. We direct them if they want to swim. They'll go into town to Lake Huron. We have a beautiful beach there.
PFAS contamination isn't unique to the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Oscoda. It has been confirmed or suspected at over 700 military bases across the country. To date, the Air Force says it has spent almost $28 million on the cleanup at Wurtsmith. A plan to address the plumes on Van Etten Lake is expected in the summer of 2021.
You have to look at it from a health perspective. Here we have the most dangerous fish in the world as far as eating them. We have this foam coming up on our beach. We have legitimate health concerns. So this is one of the places where you put your money first. And by not acknowledging those dangers, the system gets broken.
Tony Spaniola is one of the founders of the community group NOW. He owns a home on Van Etten Lake.
Being the first military base at which PFAS was discovered anywhere in the world, that what we do in Oscoda has an impact far beyond Oscoda. Well, we want to set a precedent that makes them do things in Oscoda, so they will do those things elsewhere because they need to be done.
At Great Lakes Now, we aim to cover the Great Lakes region and the people who live here, like you. Please follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and sign up for our newsletter at greatlakesnow.org.